The Hitchhiker. Our friends Josh and Sandy were firm believers in ghosts and claimed to have seen the mysterious red-haired phantom that haunted Route 44. My wife and I were sitting with them at dinner one night, and we started kidding them about it. Funny how we've never seen him, and we drive that stretch of road all the time, my wife Jill drawled. You skeptic, Sandy said, emphasizing the word as if it were a curse. One of these days, you're gonna find out I'm right. And you'll owe me a pizza. If I ever see the ghostly hitchhiker, I'll buy you a large pizza every day for a year, I promised. The evening ended pleasantly, and it wasn't long before Jill and I were driving home through the crisp fall air. Let's take Route 44, Jill said suddenly, flashing me a sideways look. Hoping to see a ghost? I chuckled, taking the turn as she directed. Ah. Jill snorted derisively. She yawned and turned her head to face the passenger window. Suddenly, she let out a shriek of sheer terror. I jumped and glanced sideways, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. A red-haired man with a bushy beard wearing a plaid shirt and blue jeans was running right next to the passenger side of the car. He kept glancing in the window and leering at Jill. Heart pounding in terror, I hit the gas. A moment later, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the red-haired man was sitting in the back seat of our car. Jill shrieked again and began pummeling the phantom with her purse. I kept looking back and forth between my wife, the phantom, and the road ahead, determined that I was not going to let the red-haired ghost force us into a fatal accident. I glanced toward the back seat for a moment, and the ghost laughed, a laugh that made my teeth tingle and the hairs on my neck stand up. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Jill gabbled the words of the rosary. Glancing in the mirror, I saw the phantom grimace as she recited the holy words. Then he vanished without a trace. I got us out of there much faster than the speed limit allowed. I was shaking from head to toe, and Jill was sobbing hysterically. As soon as I pulled into the driveway and turned off the car, I swept my wife into my arms and held her as tightly as I could. We clung together for a long time until both of us had stopped shaking and Jill's sobs had abated. I want to go inside, Jill whispered against my neck, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. That night we discussed the incident, but oddly enough, neither of us had nightmares. When we woke in the morning, I felt much better about the whole thing until I remembered my promise to Sandy the night before. I groaned aloud and then clapped a hand over my mouth lest the sound wake my wife. Too late. She opened her green eyes and gave me a sleepy smile. You owe Sandy a year's worth of pizza, Jill said. I most certainly do, I replied, rubbing the back of her neck gently. I most certainly do. The Headless Sentry. A wealthy businessman who worked behind the political scenes both in Georgetown and Charleston owned a large plantation just outside Charleston. He often entertained business and political associates at the manor house, influential men who came from other colonies and abroad. When war broke out between America and England, the owner was reluctant to take sides, for his business was primarily supported by England. Not so his family, who were actively engaged in the revolution. The plantation owner did not stay on the fence for long, though. When the British occupied Georgetown and made it a stronghold and supply base for their military operations, he declared himself a Tory, much to the wrath of his family, who labeled him a traitor. His daughter in particular was angered by his stance, for she was strictly loyal to the colonies. Still, she kept a low profile since she was living in her father's house and became a spy for General Francis Marion. It was due to the girl's alertness and the information that she gathered and furnished for the Swamp Fox that so many of the general's exploits met with success. The family owned a house in Georgetown that adjoined the cemetery of Prince George Church, and it was in a vault in that cemetery that the girl's spy left messages. And one of those messages contained vital information about a prisoner of war who was being held at the plantation. The prisoner was an old fellow, father to one of the trusted men in Marion's brigade, who had been present when many of the plans and strategies for some of the local operations had been formulated. Due to his age and infirmity, the swamp fox was afraid that the old man might unknowingly furnish the enemy with damaging information in a moment of confusion. It was vitally important that he be rescued and taken beyond the reach of his captors. The girl spy had arranged to visit the plantation to obtain supplies for her townhouse, though her real aim was to locate the old man. She found him lodged in the plantation house along with his wife and several wounded soldiers. In order to give Marion and his men time to retrieve the prisoner, the girl had the soldiers guarding the plantation invited to a reception at a neighboring estate. There was only one sentry left on guard the evening that the swamp fox and his men came thundering down the avenue of the plantation. The sentry, thinking they were British soldiers arriving from town, ran down the steps to greet them. The Americans were almost upon him when the sentry recognized Marion's men. He fired his pistol at the nearest horseman, who was already aiming at him. Both shots missed, but a saber-wielding cavalryman promptly cut off the sentry's head, leaving his body to stagger around, spouting blood like a decapitated chicken before it fell twitching to the ground amidst a growing pool of gore. The prisoners were retrieved and taken back to Marion's camp, along with the wounded British and Tory soldiers housed at the plantation who were held as prisoners of war. As for the headless sentry, he was buried in the garden near the old plantation house. Ever since the death of the sentry, folks wandering the plantation grounds at dusk have sometimes heard the thunder of phantom hooves coming up the long avenue. Moments later, a headless man dressed in the clothes of a British dragoon appears near the house, the ragged stump of his neck spouting blood. The headless sentry waves his pistol aimlessly as if trying to warn off trespassers and then drags himself away as if searching for its head. Anyone encountering the headless sentry in this manner would flee in terror, and soon word of the phantom was all over Charleston. As for the plantation workers, well, they started wearing crosses and other amulets to protect themselves whenever they were forced to walk the grounds after dark. Unfortunately, this did nothing to inhibit the specter, who still searches for his head to this day, though the plantation grounds are now covered by a golf course and a restaurant occupies part of the old manor house. The Jersey Devil and the Hat. I was putting the finishing touches on a nice big dinner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie, when Charlie blew in the back door. He'd spent the day ice fishing in the quarry, and I expected him to be in a jolly mood. But he stood there with his gray hair standing on end, his cheeks bright red with rage, and his coat and pants covered with snow. "Charlie, what happened to you?" I gasped. "And where's your new hat?" I'd bought him a fancy new fishing hat for his birthday not 2 days ago, and today was the first opportunity Charlie'd had to wear it. "My hat!" Charlie shouted, his eyes popping out of his head like a fish. "My hat!" He was too speechless to go on. He jumped from one foot to the other in rage and pointed his finger a number of times at the daily newspaper that lay on the counter beside him. "I'll tell you where my hat is," Charlie finally sputtered out. "It's at the bottom of the quarry pond. And it's all because of that blasted creature." He banged his fist down on top of the cartoon of the Jersey Devil which adorned the front of the newspaper. The Jersey Devil had been spotted all over the Pinelands region during the last few days. Charlie and I had laughed over the sightings, considering it to be a joke perpetuated by the newspapers. I gaped at my husband. "You mean it's real?" I gasped. "You actually saw the Jersey Devil?" "That dabbling creature came swooping into the quarry at the very moment I got a big fish on the line," Charlie said. "I was sitting in my chair, reeling in my line, and that fish was fighting like anything. Then I heard a big whooshing sound, and a huge creature swooshed over my head." "What did it look like?" I asked incredulously. "It looked like a dabbling dragon, with a head like a horse, a snake-like body, and bat's wings," Charlie said. "Nothing like this crazy picture." He stabbed his finger down on the newspaper. "Anyhow, it flew over me head so fast that the wind from its long wings knocked me right out of my chair. My new hat went flying into the ice hole along with my pole. That fish dragged the pole right under the ice, and it took my new hat with it. Charlie turned purple at the memory. That Jersey Devil owes me a new hat. And a fishing pole. I aim to see that justice is done. So saying, Charlie grabbed his rifle from over the back door and headed out into the yard. "Charlie, what about dinner?" I called after him. "I ain't got time for dinner," Charlie shouted back to me. "I'm getting up a posse. I'll teach that Jersey Devil to mess with a man's new hat." And that was the last I saw of my husband for the next 3 days. Charlie roused the whole neighborhood, and the men went hunting all over creation, racing from town to town following every rumor they heard about the Jersey Devil. They never caught a glimpse of it, but once they followed its strange tracks through the snowy woods for over an hour before the tracks disappeared. Charlie come home after I'd gone to bed and leave before I got up in his determination to track down the creature that lost him his hat. After about a week, the Jersey Devil disappeared back into the pinelands and Charlie came home to roost. He was still in a bitter rage about losing his hat and his pole and sat sulking in his study all day. Around supper time, the mayor stopped by our house and presented him with a new fishing hat and a fancy new pole to replace those he lost when the Jersey Devil flew over the quarry. Charlie was tickled pink, and he went out the very next day to do some ice fishing. He came back with the biggest fish he ever landed and a smile that nearly split his cheeks in two. So maybe the Jersey Devil did him a favor after all. The Phantom Bellman. I gasped a bit as I wheeled my heavy bag toward the white-trimmed double doors leading to the hotel lobby. I was having some trouble adjusting to the altitude in Yellowstone after living my whole life at sea level. My husband Frank, on the other hand, took to the elevation as one mountain-born, much to my annoyance. He already dragged the rest of our luggage inside the hotel and was checking in at the front desk as I doddered my way into the lobby and collapsed in a chair near the fireplace. "Come on, slowpoke, we are on the 4th floor," my husband called happily and dashed down the hall carrying a load of luggage as expertly as any of the bellmen. I struggled out of the chair, which was very comfortable, and aimed myself somewhat erratically for the hall. About halfway down, a compassionate bellman overtook me and claimed my heavy bag. Relieved, I hitched my handbag over my shoulder and followed the bellman. We chattered about my trip all the way up the elevator, and the bellman had some great suggestions for hikes we might take along the lake shore and where we might see wildlife. The elevator let us off on the 4th floor, and we walked to the end of a long, rather spooky hallway. I shivered a bit, feeling uncomfortable and not understanding why this was so. But the friendly bellman distracted me with his gentle conversation. He left me in front of the open door with my bag, bowing slightly like an old-fashioned gentleman in a movie. I fumbled in my handbag, looking for my wallet, then realized I'd given it to my husband so he could check us in. "Wait a moment," I told the friendly bellman and hurried inside the room, calling to my husband. Frank was locked in the bathroom, but my wallet was on the bedside table. Pulling out some money, I hurried to the door, only to find that the friendly bellman had vanished. "Were you calling for me, honey?" my husband asked, coming out of the bathroom. "I was looking for my wallet to tip the bellman that helped me with my bag," I explained. "But he disappeared while I was looking for it." "We can leave a tip for him at the desk in the lobby," my husband said. "Great idea," I said. "Don't let me forget." He had some great advice for our trip. Told me to drink lots of water to help me adjust to the elevation and recommended the hike out to Storm Point. Apparently, the view of the lake is lovely. Frank's face lit up at this suggestion. He loved to hike. We turned our attention to unpacking our bags. We were staying at the hotel for 2 nights before heading up to Canyon. Frank was going fishing for lake trout tomorrow, while I took a tour around the lower loop, learning all about the Yellowstone volcano and looking at the geysers and other hot springs. Our room was quite lovely. It was at the end of the hall on the back side of the hotel, but I could see the lake out of the side window. Still, something about the room felt a little strange, as if someone was watching. I had goosebumps all along my upper arms as I unpacked. "What nonsense," I said aloud, trying to make the feeling go away. "What did you say?" Frank asked, looking up from his fishing tackle box. "Nothing," I said hastily. "Let's go down to dinner." We had reservations for 7 p.m. at the hotel dining room, and it was almost that time now. I grabbed my wallet, remembering that I wanted to tip the friendly bellman. The being watched feeling returned full force as we walked down the spooky hallway to the elevator. I shivered, and my husband suggested that I go back for my sweater. "No, I'm fine," I said hastily, not wanting to be alone in the room. We descended in the elevator and walked down the lower hall to the lobby. I paused for a moment at the bell desk, hoping to see my friendly bellman. A nice young man greeted me with a smile, and I asked about the man who'd helped me with my luggage, explaining that he vanished before I could tip him. "Do you know his name?" the young man asked. "I'm sorry, I don't," I said. Then I spied the picture on the desk, showing a group of bellmen. "That's him," I said, pointing. The young man's smile slipped a bit. "That is an historic picture, taken many years ago," he said cautiously. "None of those men work here now." "Really?" "That's strange," I said, feeling cold again. "The bellman who helped me looks just like this man." "That man was the bell captain," the young man said. "He's since passed away." Face devoid of expression, he added, "I'm sorry, I don't know who it was that helped you today." "Oh well, maybe I will see him again," I said with an uneasy glance at the photo on the desk. Strange that the man who helped me looked exactly like the former bell captain. I shuddered and hurried over to my husband, who was examining some of the lovely photographs displayed round the lobby. "All done?" he asked, taking my hand and leading me toward the dining room. "Not really," I said uneasily, and told him about picture. "So you're saying a ghost helped you with your luggage?" Frank asked when I finished. Hearing it put that way sent cold shudders down my spine. "Pretty much," I said. "I'm not sure I want to spend the night at this hotel. What if the ghost comes back? If the phantom bellman comes back, we'll ask him to take our luggage down to the car," said Frank. "That way, we can make a fast getaway and we won't have to carry our bags." "Works for me." "Get out of here," I said with a reluctant grin. He smiled back and took my hand. "Let's go to dinner," my husband said. The skeleton. The boy had been out looking for work all day with no luck. When night fell, he was far from home. He decided to spend the night in an empty, run-down house. The minute he laid down, he fell into a sound sleep. The boy was awakened quite suddenly by a thump on the roof. With a pounding heart, he sat up and lit a candle. A voice called out, "I'm falling down." The boy scrambled out of the way just as a skeletal arm came crashing to the floor. The voice shouted again, "I'm falling down," and another arm landed beside the first. Then a leg, the chest, and a second leg. Before he could count to 10, a complete skeleton was standing in front of him, grinning madly. The boy lifted his chin and grinned back, determined not to show his fear. The skeleton was delighted by the boy's spirit and said, "You have courage, son. Are you brave enough to wrestle me?" The boy was terrified, but he did not dare refuse this strange apparition. The skeleton and the boy wrestled back and forth, up and down the room. Remembering a trick his older brother had taught him, he twisted suddenly and threw the skeleton onto the ground. "You've won," the skeleton said. "Such courage deserves a reward. Come, I will give you my treasure." The boy was startled. What kind of treasure could an old skeleton have? "Pick me up and carry me on your back to the next room," said the skeleton. "Remember to take your candle." The boy picked up the skeleton and put it on his back. Then he retrieved his candle from the corner of the room and carried the skeleton into the next room. As they passed through the doorway, the skeleton blew out the candle. "Now, stop that," he said, annoyed. The skeleton cackled madly. The boy lit the candle again, and the skeleton blew it out. "I'm going to drop you," the boy threatened. He lit the candle again, and again the skeleton blew it out. The boy dropped the skeleton onto the floor. "I will break all your bones," he said. Impressed, the skeleton said, "You are so courageous and strong, I will let you see my treasure." The boy lit the candle and turned to look into the room. It was filled with piles and piles of gold and silver and jewels. "I want you to promise me something," the skeleton said. The boy drew his gaze reluctantly from the magnificent treasure and looked at the skeleton. "I want you to promise me that you will gather all the poor people you can find in one day and give them each a bag of money. The rest you can keep for yourself." It would be a good thing to share this wealth with the needy, the boy decided, so he agreed to do what the skeleton had asked. The skeleton gave a happy laugh and began to disappear, piece by piece. First his head, then his leg, then his chest, then his other leg, and so on until he was gone. The boy did just as he had promised, and when he had finished his task, he took the rest of the treasure back to his family. They lived in comfort all of their days.